a warm welcome in the festival. Thank you. It's a morning. It's a good start of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very nice way to start the day. It makes a difference
Yeah.
from normal days.
Yeah. So we have been working for a while with Mitch now, and in some of our conversations, you will see what we are preparing. This is like a spoiler alert. It's called Predavitor Fellowship. We will see in the next days. So in we have been having conversation with Mitch for a while now. And in some of our conversation, a recurring theme that we have had, some of the most insightful conversation actually we had about education, about teaching, was why are we actually going to school? And then we thought that it's a lovely occasion to start a festival with just this idea, because why is such a lovely and generous question, isn't it? It helps you give sense and meaning to what you do and find the purpose that you're having. So we decided to ask Mitch to help us set up this conversation, and Mitch gracefully agreed. And finally, I will shut up now. Thank you, Mitch, for this patience and leave the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. To worked quite a bit over the years with Romanian educators and schools, and it's been a real privilege to be invited here today to talk about this question. And as Elena says, it's such a nice question to begin with. Why do we go to school? We spend a lot of time as teachers and as educators talking about the what and the how that we often forget about the why. We're so busy in the day to day of things that we don't get a lot of time to talk about that or think about that. So I've been asked today to talk a little bit about and hopefully offer some thoughts or answers about the question of why do we go to school? It's a question I've thought about a great deal as a teacher and educator and as a philosopher. It's also a question I thought quite a lot about as a student when I was at school. I think there were definitely times, usually when I was standing on a frozen rugby pitch in the middle of February, somewhere in the south of England, when I was asking myself, just why is it that we go to school? What is all of this for? I think, and I hope my answer has changed a little since then. I'm not sure back then that I would have given an answer that I could probably repeat to you all today, but perhaps that's one of the great benefits of hindsight. I think my answer to this question is probably very simple. We go to school to get an education. But please bear with me, though. I know what you must be thinking. You've registered for this amazing education festival. You've logged in to hear this keynote speech early in the morning. And here I am offering you remarkable insights like we go to school to get an education. But I really do think this is important because education is something much deeper, richer, much more complex, and more significant than merely teaching and learning. In fact, I would say that the point of education is not that students learn. The point of education is that students learn something for a reason from someone. That is, they're learning something specific, they're learning something with a purpose, and they're learning something from another person and with other people. Just to say that school is for learning is, I think, an empty sort of statement. And to say that school is for learning is also to miss huge amounts of what school and education are really doing. Learning can happen in all kinds of places and in all kinds of ways. Lots of modern technologies from YouTube to AI can be really valuable tools for learning, but I think that's different from education. Learning is a part of education, but it's never the whole picture. The goal of learning is that we have some new knowledge or new skills, but the goal of education is connected to the kinds of lives we wish to live and the kind of world we wish to live in. So that tells me that ultimately education is how we come to live a well-lived life. If we want to say anything of the importance of education, I think it's probably this, that education is trying to help us live a well-lived life. Now, what that looks like for you and for me and for our students will inevitably differ, but that's not a problem, so long as we can keep to this central notion that education is about living a life of flourishing. With all of that said, I think we can pin down some of the things that we go to school for, some of the answers to that very first question, why do we go to school? If school is for education, and education is about living a well-lived life, then I think my first answer to the question is, we go to school to get equipment for living. Now, I'd call this equipment for living just because I think there are actually lots of different kinds of things we might get from school. The most obvious of these, and probably the most common, would be knowledge. We need to know things in order to be able to navigate the world and do things in it. But it would also be things like skills. So our ability to do things, from things as fundamental as reading and writing to things as complex as programming computers or running experiments. It would be values, the things that we hold as important, things that we see as significant in our lives and the lives of other people. So democracy, equality, kindness, attitudes, the way we respond to the world, the way we act and think, self-expression, inclusivity, a concern for the natural world. And capabilities, these would be more fundamental sorts of things like empathy, creativity, critical thinking. All of these, I think, are the equipment that we need to live any life, but especially to live a well-lived life. Some of these will change over time, and they will change from place to place and culture to culture. They'll also change from person to person. Some of them might be pretty universal, literacy, numeracy, empathy, but some might be much more specific. What's important is to see that it isn't just knowledge that matters. There's a whole range of equipment we need. I think education in the last 4 or 5 decades, possibly longer, has heavily privileged this part of our education and has really focused on knowledge above all else. But if we don't have the skills to do anything with that knowledge or the capabilities to live in this world, then that knowledge is all for nothing. That's why my second answer to why we go to school is to enter a social world. This is about learning how to become part of a world that wasn't made for us, that exists beyond us and contains lots of different people doing lots of different things. Of course, it's learning to socialize with our peers, to interact with teachers, but there's much more to it than just that. I'm also thinking about the cultural world that we inhabit, the historical place we find ourselves in the world, the traditions that we're surrounded by, and also things like professions or industries or vocations. As an example, when I'm teaching philosophy to students, part of what I'm doing, along with giving them knowledge and giving them skills, is also showing them this is what a philosopher does. This is how they think. This is how they work. I'm making them part of that group. And we're also showing them and helping them understand how all of these bump up against one another. They overlap, and there are layers and layers to society, with some cultures and traditions being radically different from our own and some being much more similar. This is one of the aspects that makes me say that whilst we can find learning in lots of places, and especially using technology today, we can't find education that way, because education requires us to be amongst people, for all of the messiness and complexity that that involves. So far, I've spoken about going to school to get equipment for living and to encounter a social world. But there is also a huge personal dimension to school. As such, I would also say that we go to school to encounter ourselves. In some ways, this might be the most important part of education. And the most important reason why we go to school, part of this is in us learning about ourselves and helping to construct our identity and our sense of self. Part of this is experiencing our own independence, that we can make choices, that we have real consequences, and that something we have to try and manage in our lives. But it's also about experiencing our freedom, what freedom means and the responsibility that comes with freedom. How we might be free to do something, but that doesn't mean we should. And it doesn't mean we won't be met with resistance or opposition. This is something we can only learn when we're with other people. And school is a special sort of environment in which we can learn those things. I think this aspect of school and of education is less about who you are and more about how you are. How do you act? How do you respond? How do you think? How do you relate to others? How do you find meaning and purpose? Most of the time, when we think or talk about school and education, we put knowledge and skills, what I've called equipment for living, front and center. Then we might think a little bit about the social dimension if we have time, and then probably very little about this aspect, learning and encountering ourselves. I think there are two important observations to be made about that. The first is that these three things can't be separated. Whenever you do something that impacts one of them, you impact the others. The moment I teach students about World War II and give them knowledge of that historical event, I'm inevitably impacting their sense of identity, the historical and cultural world they're part of, and the ways in which they see themselves as a human being living with other humans. So it's for that reason that I would say that education isn't one single thing, it's made up of parts. And when we influence any part of it, we influence all of it. This is because education is multidimensional. As educators, then, we have to remember this whenever we teach, whenever we design a curriculum or plan a lesson. We can never deal with these three things on their own. They will always be intimately woven together. And if we only focus on one of them or emphasize one of them, we end up with an imbalanced approach, and we can end up doing harm to the other aspects of education. We see this when we see an excessive emphasis on achievement, on grades, on knowledge. We see that that has a negative effect on the students' ideas about who they are. It leads to excessive pressure, to mental health issues, to problems of identity, of failure, and of meaning in one's life. Now, the solution isn't to get rid of knowledge in education or to only focus on students and their well-being. It's to find a balance. And the second observation I would make about education having these three parts is that I think we should flip this usual hierarchy. If the student and their subjectivity, their freedom, aren't put first, it's no longer education because they're no longer people. Now it's just managing objects. Very quickly, it just becomes learning, and at the far extreme, that becomes indoctrination. Doing this requires teacher judgment. This is the expertise, the experience, and professional competence of educators. This means that the decisions made are of the teacher and not based on following protocols or policies or applying some theory or methodology, because the situations that call for a teacher's judgment are always new, always particular, and they're always complex. There can't be any rules that tell you how to respond as a teacher. It has to be a matter of judgment. There's one other dimension to education that I think is really important, one that makes it not just meaningful and impactful, but quite unique in the lives of students. And for this, I would say we go to school to get what we couldn't ask for. I think education is not simply about giving students what they know they want or say they need, but about moving them beyond what they already know they want. They can ask for what they want from ChatGPT or YouTube or Skillshare. What education offers is totally new horizons, new opportunities, reflection on what they feel or think they want or desire. Education is about surprising them, interrupting them in their lives and the way that they think, giving them what they would never have been able to ask for themselves, what they never knew they needed, what they never knew existed. This is why students can't be customers and why education can't be totally student-centered or student-led. All of this means that good education will always be slow, difficult, frustrating, unreliable. This is what the philosopher of education Gert Biester calls the beautiful risk of education, because we don't know for sure it's going to work. We can't know for sure, because it's all about human beings being human beings, being with each other, figuring out their freedom, their needs, their lives, doing it all through communication, through language. And the more we try and control that or streamline that or make that efficient and repeatable and reliable, the less it will work. Because then we're not really dealing with human beings anymore. We're dealing with objects, or worse, numbers. If you take the risk out of education, you take the education out of education. The desire to make education strong, secure, predictable, and risk-free is, in a sense, an attempt to wish that reality away. But it's exactly these imperfections and uncertainties that make education possible, that make education sustainable, because it sees people as people. It's for that reason that I would argue that all questions about education are existential questions, because they're about how to live. Whenever the people with clipboards and spreadsheets show up, the people with policies and best practice and protocols, this has been forgotten. It's the very thing I think that makes so many teachers do what they do. It's at the heart of what makes education what it is. It's what makes a school radically different from an online course or a YouTube series or talking with ChatGPT, all of which can be great for learning, but can't give us an education. Because it's with human beings coming together that school can be what it most needs to be. So I'll give you one last answer to that question. Why do we go to school? The answer that matters most to me, I think, we go to school to find a way to be at home in the world. This is a phrase from the brilliant German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. I think maybe it seems quite gentle at first, maybe a bit romantic, the idea of finding a way to be at home in the world. But I think when we let that idea sit with us, we see it's really quite incisive, really powerful. It cuts to the heart of what we're all striving for. And I think there might be no more important philosophical question in a lot of ways. I should end, I think, with a few words about how we can make this happen, because otherwise I would feel like I'd left you with nothing but big ideas, no matter how important these ideas might be. So first of all, make opportunities. Whenever you can, wherever you can, nudge your teaching, your colleagues, your school in this direction. When you rewrite a lesson, redesign a curriculum, work with a colleague, take every opportunity you can to really connect with what education is about and what it's for. These different aspects of education. Look for balance and put students' freedom as human beings front and center. Doing that lets you build your gains. Tiny move here, a tiny move there, given enough time and enough people, builds to really impactful change. Sustainable long-term change is rarely about overnight success. It comes a little at a time until eventually it's a torrent, it's an avalanche, and then it can't be ignored. To do all of this, I would say that there's nothing more transformative than finding your people. The ones who also want to make a difference, who see the problems and their solutions the way that you do. They might be in the classroom next door to yours. They might be the other side of the country or the other side of the world, but finding your people and building support and encouragement and inspiration is unfailingly rewarding. And finally, push for change where and when you can. That might be with your own schools or communities or on a higher level, a national level, but change is slow, it is resisted, it is difficult. We have got to push and push hard. We have to be change agents in the world. And I'd ask you all to keep the faith. It won't be non-stop success or endless joy. It'll be tough at times, but keeping the faith, remembering why we are doing what we're doing, what education is really about, remembering why we go to school as teachers as well as students. We're helping other human beings live good, meaningful, well-lived lives. Helps us to keep that fire burning. So it just leaves me to say thank you all so much for your time this morning. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I hope something of what I've said today has resonated with you. If you absolutely fundamentally disagree with everything I've said, then that's brilliant as well, because that moves us forward. That's part of having this conversation. I hope you have an amazing festival over the next couple of days.
Oh, thank you so much for this presentation, Mitch. I've written down so many ideas. This idea of equipment for living is such a wonderful idea. This idea that education is multidimensional and there needs to be a balance between them because it's so easy to imbalance it, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. And I think there are a lot of demands on us as educators, as schools, internally and externally, that want us to focus on specific things and not have that balance.
And while we wait for participants to also ask their questions in the Q&A section, I totally encourage you to do that. I was thinking about these roles, because I think it comes because you also have multiple roles, isn't it? You're a philosopher, you're an educator. You also had multiple perspective over your life, living in different countries, sometimes even culturally very far away, in some ways very close in others. So I think you are a bit of a master of transitions, change, and intersections, isn't it? Because this is like the theme of the theme of the festival, like.
I
How
wouldn't
it
claim to be a
become.
master of anything, but that's very, very kind. Certainly working in those different ways, being a teacher, being somebody who's led academic faculties, and also as a philosopher, but also now doing learning design work. It is those different perspectives that really, really help, I think, because when you are in your classroom day in, day out, it can become a bubble for you. And it has to, in a way, to allow you to do what you're doing. So taking opportunities when they present themselves to be able to move outside of that, to see what others are doing, even in your own school, but even better in other countries, in other cultures, is incredibly powerful and really, really rewarding, I think.
Like, in a way, we ask teachers to do the same thing, isn't it? To have multiple hats and to be a bit masters of intersections and transitions and change. because this is what is happening right now to them. We ask them to be, I don't know, educators, sometimes social workers, sometimes babysitters, uh, sometimes motivators, researchers, sociologists, pedagogues. And now, in a certain way, we're also asking them to have this a bit of philosopher hat, almost filling the role of a community philosopher, stopping everyone when they start going a bit too fast, especially in education, saying that, hey, let's remember a bit, well, what this is all about. This is not necessarily only about exams and graduations. This is also about what we are preparing students for. You said like so beautiful, written by Anna Arendt, to be at home in the world. Is this too much to ask from our teachers?
Oh,
And
yes.
how can you find, particularly in these times where everything is happening so fast and there is a certain war on our attention, how can you find some time to start, for example, the school year with this? And what might be useful questions, for example, to ask yourself to prepare for this role?
Well, I think those demands are too much. And I think those demands are wrong when they're placed upon teachers. I don't think teachers do need to be those things. I think those demands come about from misunderstanding what education is there to do. If we go back to this idea that education is to help people live a well-lived life, that doesn't mean I have to be all of those things to this person in front of me. In fact, one of the most useful things I can do is not serve those needs for them so that they have an ability to find solutions themselves and grow and develop themselves. So actually, I think one of the things I encourage teachers very often to do is to think about at rock bottom, what is it we're here to do? What is it we're here for? We're here to help people live a well-lived life, to be at home in the world, essentially to produce good people and make a good society. Anything beyond that is not ours. That is somebody else's role and responsibility. But also, we can fulfill that responsibility, I think, by doing less, but doing more of the right things. We're asked to do so much, and I think we can cut a lot of that away and probably achieve our goals much more effectively by doing less, but focusing really, really intently on what that core mission of school and education is. Now, that will come with resistance and opposition, and that will come with people claiming that we're not doing what we should, or that we're not doing things properly, or that these new demands come on. And that's where we have to hold and resist, I think.
Hmm. I have a question from one of our participants who is basically continuing in this direction. Because sometimes, and I also feel that, sometimes it feels like philosophy is so far away from reality. I don't know why we could have this impression, because in the past, philosophy was actually very close to reality. It's what inspired it, actually. And it feels as far away from our school reality, where there are so multiple constraints that you talked about. And it feels like the distance between, what we are trying to achieve to do and what we are able to do and how we are hold down to earth, is very, very big. If you were to think of a first step that you would do in the first week of school, for example, where would you start it to ground you, considering
Oh,
this very changing
yeah,
realities?
yeah, absolutely. And well, I think there are two directions you can look. One is your relationship with the students and how you establish that, what kind of relationship it is. Opening up that conversation right at the beginning about why are we here?
Mm,
What are we doing? What are we trying to make happen? But also having that conversation with colleagues, I think is, as I said before, finding your people, whether they're in the same building as you or not, that is the other side that I would do. And keep coming back to those conversations. It's not as though you have them once and then everything is set on the right path and everything will be good. We have to keep returning to it. We have to keep coming back to it.
mm, mm. Um, Consider continuing with this, the answer to the question why we go to school It's still an ongoing negotiation of our society, isn't it? Like I said, so multiple perspectives that we can see there. There's a philosophical perspective, sometimes a sociological perspective, there's a learning perspective. And these perspectives have also changed quite a lot throughout the years, in the sense that, in the beginning, education was about getting an education. It has started to become more about something else, and we will discuss in a bit what has started to be. You have mentioned quite a few, this need for achievement and for more, academic achievements and grades and more knowledge, even more knowledge. But if you would think about throughout the eras, what are the biggest shifts that you are seeing, particularly now, let's say in the last 100 years? How would you feel? What do you think is
Well,
mostly?
education always comes down to this question of who are you going to educate and how.
Mm,
And obviously, over the last 150 years, our answer to who are we going to educate has got broader and broader and broader, and for very good reason, right? We aren't generally, in most countries, excluding certain groups from education. There are still instances of this in some countries and with some groups, but broadly speaking, we've moved from educating fewer people to educating more people. So who we educate has shifted massively. Um, there's always been a link between how we educate people and the kind of way in which we see society. What kind of a society do we want, and what role do we want people to play in it? Do we want people to just be productive cogs in a big machine, in which case we educate them one way? Do we want them to be thoughtful, reflective, democratic citizens? Then we educate them another way. So there is always this sort of feedback loop, this backwards and forwards negotiation between education and what we teach to young people and the kind of views we have of society, what we think society needs or should be. And those two things are constantly in dialogue, often a very tense dialogue, a complicated dialogue. Um, you can see that education is almost always used to serve political ends.
mm,
If you look at any of the education changes that are happening in the United States at the moment, but that comes back to what kind of a society people in power wish to have. And that dictates the kind of education that's being provided. Now, I think what we want to try and do is emancipate education from that sort of interference, right? It shouldn't be the case that changing views by people that hold power dictate what education is. It should be dictated by, fundamental research and
mm.
expertise. Uh, it should be about producing good lives and good societies. Uh, but that is a fight that is always ongoing.
Because there is a tension in how we define good society these days, isn't it? What it means
Yes.
to be a good citizen, actually, in a good society, and probably this is something that we also feel at the level of teachers, where sometimes, and these days, particularly in Romania, we can be sometimes quite confused about what society is asking of us. What is the purpose of the thing that we are trying to do? Um,
Well, one way we can respond to that is to realize that no matter how society might change in the day to day, we have these phrases that we live in a rapidly changing
mm,
society. But that's true in all sorts of day to day ways. But underneath that, there's lots that hasn't changed. Human beings still want community and connection and friendship. They want meaning and purpose in their lives. They want to navigate grief and respond to love and affection. They want to be creative, right? This has not changed, right? You can go back thousands of years and read, ancient Greek literature, and this is what humans want. So I think serving that deeper idea of humanity can help us navigate some of those more uh, those sort of rough seas of politics
mhm.
and society in some ways.
And now I will ask something to your educator hat, not so much to your
Okay.
philosopher hat, but to your educator hat, because you built this conversation right to the point where we are trying to do. So historically speaking, people have tried to, uh, as an intellectual purpose, as a purpose for us as human beings, it has been in some ways different, in some ways the same. Like this idea of building wisdom actually has been quite a lot with us throughout history. It was an important thing to do. And wisdom also has a moral aspect to it, isn't it? But these days, our focus tends to be more and more on intelligence and knowledge. And sometimes even to the point where is amoral, where is neutrally moral, and there isn't necessarily a need for an ethical or moral aspect to it, but it's more important to achieve it. We value quite a lot intelligence and intelligent people, even if, or even more when they are morally very ambiguous, to say the least, if not
Yes.
complicated. And I can look at some of our, I don't know, obsessions with various leaders of the world
Hmm.
to point to that. But in our, way, in day-to-day life, we focus quite a lot on intelligence in students. And sometimes, particularly because the way we do evaluation these days in most countries, not only in Romania, focusing on answers and being able to recall a lot of things still, now more and more systemized and itemized, it's becoming quite complicated to understand what you can do in class actually to build wisdom. Because sometimes things are not, they seem difficult, but they aren't that difficult. So what did you do in class, for example, while we are teaching to develop a bit wisdom, not only
Well, I
intelligence?
think there are possibly lots of things you can do. One of the most valuable, I think, is to de-emphasize the outcome of what students are doing. Because all the time that we are very obsessed with the final outcome, the result, the thing that they eventually produce that gets graded, let's say, that does lean into students doing whatever they can to make that outcome good, right? That can start to lean into moral problems, let's say. It also seems to overemphasize perhaps skills like brute intelligence. If instead we really emphasize the value of the process that they're going through and we're engaged with that process, if we slow things down and let that process really take its time, then we can focus on some of the capabilities that the students have, right? Because producing really good work and really emphasizing that process is going to require them to do things like empathize,
Mm.
collaborate, reflect. We can't sort of develop those capabilities unless we give them the time and space. And all the time we're focused on outcomes, we're not affording these the time and space. So I would emphasize with students, I would really focus on things where I am assessing their process rather than the outcome, or where the process is also part of the final assessment, final grade, let's say, where we're taking time and really talking about the process as we're going through it, where I'm using that process to develop capabilities like empathy, collaboration, reflection, and so on. And I'm also emphasizing to them that almost all of the learning that they will do comes from the process and not the outcome. The outcome is the very last thing, right? The learning all happens in producing that outcome. It's all in the process. So I think education in many, many countries and many cultures massively overemphasizes the outcome at the expense of the process. And shifting some of that emphasis can really, really help. Because it puts them, again, as I said, if you're not talking about the freedom and the subjectivity of the student, it's unbalanced. By opening up the process, you give them this chance to be human beings. There's that nice Samuel Beckett phrase, try, fail, try again, fail again. And that sort of process can't happen if we're just focusing on the outcome. But huge amounts can be learned if we are open to that.
Mm.
So that would be my biggest thing to teachers, is to let's move back to the process, the experience that they're going through,
Mm.
and really make that rich and meaningful, and de-emphasize the outcome.
Would you say that this is also the biggest shift you would want teachers to go
Yes,
to class
yes.
with?
Well, I think so, because that shift does so many of the things that I was talking about today. It's not the only thing to be done by any means. I think there's policy things and national level things and all of this. But just in your day-to-day classroom practice, that shift can do a huge amount. And there are lots of ways of working, problem-based learning, project-based learning, that can all support a more process-focused pedagogy. But yeah, that would be, I think that can have some of the biggest impact for a single sort of mental shift.
Mm. Thank you, Mitch. I can't believe it's almost 9. I'm like, oh my God, I want to continue this conversation like forever. Uh, but we are at our last question for today. Um, and I just received like a very good question, but maybe we will be able to answer it next time. Usually, at the end of our sessions in the festival, particularly because it's in the beginning of the school year, we ask our wonderful speakers to leave like a message that should go with teachers in the class in the first week and then, you know, on to the next year. What would you say that message is for you?
I mean, I can't come up with anything better to say than Hannah Arendt's words that I think are
Mm.
so perfect, because it applies to, I mean, in the context she's writing those words that I mentioned, she's not specifically talking about education, but it applies to so much of what we are trying to do as human beings. And when we're trying to work with one another, and we're trying to think about our own lives as well as the lives of our students, remember that so much of what everyone is trying to do is trying to find how to be at home in the world.
Mm.
And they might be getting that very wrong. They might be getting that very right. You might be able to help them or not. But just keep that in mind, that we're all new here. This is all a first run thing. This is all, day one on the job in a way, that we're all trying to find a way to be at home in the world.
Mm. I said it will be the last question, but I changed my mind because it seems our participants have just, getting started. And there is one particular question that I feel we should answer because it speaks so much of my own feelings at the same time. Um, some of us, many of us, feel that we live in this world where we just don't have time for this. There's no time for thinking. We're doers, isn't it? We're doers. We need to be productive. We don't have time for that in all these constraints. We don't have time for the process, you know. Um, and in some ways it's subjective, in many ways it's objective, in the sense that in this era of speed and of an AI that answers questions in just a couple of questions seconds, it feels like you don't have enough time. How would you work with this time poverty, let's say, this self-inflicted time poverty that we sometimes feel? Do you feel it? And how do
Well,
you
absolutely,
manage it for
absolutely. I
yourself?
mean, I do in my day-to-day work. I absolutely did as a teacher. And what I found myself doing over the years was less.
Mm.
I found myself doing less, just letting more and more and more things go, feeling like I don't need to cover every bit of content. I don't have to tell them what every philosopher who ever lived thought and argued. I don't have to, because what I'm really focusing on is developing them as people. And I can get that to happen by doing less, but doing the right things, the fewest things possible. There's a really brilliant metaphor in the Tao Te Ching, great work of Chinese philosophy that I taught for many, many years. It says that the very best carver makes the fewest cuts. And I think that's what I was always trying to do. I don't want to make as many cuts as possible to get that. I want to figure out what's the fewest cuts I can make to get this thing made. I want to find out what are exactly the right cuts to make and when to make them. So the pressure is on there to do more and more and more. And we know from experience that that doesn't actually get any more achievement, any more success, really. The returns are diminishing and diminishing.
Mm.
So maybe try the opposite approach, do less, but much more thoughtfully, much more intentionally. And I think you can then probably get greater impact. But it takes a leap of faith.
Well, Mitch, Thank you so much. As I always say to our colleagues, philosophy is the primordial form of therapy and psychotherapy, actually.
Yeah.
But I think we are not so used to that anymore. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for helping setting us up